Why is it that everybody in jiu-jitsu is obsessed with fast progress, but they're still getting smashed 2 or more years into the process? Comes down to 7 key errors in your training that if you can avoid, you can become infamously known as somebody who achieved a really fast black belt. And no, I'm not talking about Moneyberg because mine's actually legit. Anyway, let's dive in. One of the biggest killers for all jiu-jitsu students around the world that absolutely annihilates their progress is collecting random moves. I bang on about it all the time, but it's so important to iterate. You watching right now, whilst you're eating your food or taking a shit, it's not necessarily your fault that this happens because coaches around the world are either lazy or arrogant or don't really care about developing a system that's actually going to help you get really good really quickly. And so unfortunately what they do is they just look at the laminated curriculum on the wall, check out that they're going to teach you a close guard sweep, a knee cut pass, and then an armbar. And then they show you exactly what those moves are, give you none of the tools to be able to put your ingredients together to make the meal that you're after, and just say, there you go. And so you get crushed underneath a brown belt, Kesugatami, you probably get chest compressioned, can opened, or wrist locked, and that sucks. The simple way to avoid this isn't by focusing on learning new moves, but developing systems for the moves that you already know. When I first began, I was a bit of a DAS specialist, and I know that sounds funny to say at a white belt level, but it was something I gravitated towards very heavily, seeing as though I have an albatross wingspan. Now, the thing that made my DAS even more dangerous was recognizing certain elbow positions that opened up other strangles. So when the DAS was defended correctly, I could go into arm-in guillotines, or I could go into anacondas. Or if all of that failed, I later then realized that I could gain hip-to-hip connection by rolling over my shoulder and take them out. Even if the strangle failed, I would still gain an advantage from the entire movement sequence. And so instead of being just a one-trick pony that was thinking that I was another random move away from being improved, I started to improve the things that I was already doing by focusing on actions and reactions that were very common from my training partners. And this accelerated my game like nothing else. So if you can start to do this, you will actually start to build a system of movements instead of just collecting random shit, hoping that it sticks. Which leads me to my second point. My first loss at blue belt was because I did not prioritize defense in the early part of my career. We first started, we slap bumped. I tried the most god-awful Harai Goshi you've ever seen and got reversed and thrown onto my back. This was like a Galapagos turtle being turned upside down and being unable to get back to top position. I had no idea what the fuck I was doing down there, and add the pressure and exhaustion of a competition match and a very large Samoan gentleman being on top of me, I was in a pretty bad place. And so after that match, I dedicated a fair chunk of my training time to being able to get out of those positions when I did find myself in there, first of all by not making silly mistakes of sloppy takedowns, but secondly, even if I did choose to attempt a sloppy takedown, devising a game plan of what I could do to make sure that my defense was solid. Things like keeping inside frames, things like learning how to wrestle up from side control half guard, things like escaping bottom positions, mount, north-south, all of the places that I got stuck. And so once I stopped neglecting my defense, I actually had more confidence in my takedowns, knowing that even if they went bad, I would have skills to not have the same thing happen to me again. But if you don't go back into your training and fill those holes, you will repeat the same mistakes and you won't make any progress. The next point is one of the biggest hindrances of progress for all beginners who come into the sport because they think that speed and strength are the things that facilitate techniques. Now, everybody knows who Gordon is, right? And he himself has said this, that he's notoriously unathletic. If you got him to run on a treadmill or a 40-yard dash, he would get obliterated by high school students. And yet, he never seems behind the 8 ball, he never gets his guard passed, and he never gets into any real trouble. And so that kind of dispels the myth that everybody thinks that strength and speed are the reasons that you're getting beat. And so taking from that lesson, you can start to understand that instead of prioritizing attributes, because there's always going to be somebody bigger and stronger than you, you need to start to think about prioritizing leverage, timing, weight placement, and precision. And if you can start to move your techniques towards that style of training versus thinking that I need to be faster in my transitions or I need to use more strength to get this to work, you'll actually start to see a dramatic rise in progress and you won't get stuck in plateaus for months on end. Which leads me into my next point. The thing that keeps people stuck in plateaus is prioritizing shitty positions. Now, what do I mean by this? I mean that there's a hierarchy of positions that you might not know about if you're a beginner, and essentially it looks like this. Mount and the back are at the very top. They are the best attacking positions that you can ask for. They also score the most points in any competition that you're going to go in, whether it be ADCC, IBJJF, or any other rule set. And then, in my opinion, you could disagree with this if you like, half guard is second, and it's well above side control. Reason being is that side control is the place where most problems happen in terms of a pinning situation. When you're in half guard, you've separated their legs and you're actually pinning their hips to a much larger degree than you would be in side control. This means you have a much better ability to keep them pinned on their back, and you also have, in my opinion, better pathways to the back and better pathways to mount than you do in side control. A lot of you guys watching this video only pass to side control. You only attack from side control, and you're wasting shitloads of training hours prioritizing side control and being stuck underneath it as well. And so once you recognize that there's actually a hierarchy of positions that it is going to lead to disproportionate success, you start to modify your game in a way and change your perspective that allows you to actually get better results by using the same amount of energy. For example, in a Toriando passing situation, most people think getting to side control would be the best option. I disagree. I think that stepping into the legs and going into half guard and making sure that you pin their lower body and their upper body at the same time, that stops them from wrestling up, that gives you the chance to get upper body grip so that you can transfer directly into mount, is far superior. So if you didn't know that the best two attacking pathways are actually through half guard to get to mount and the back, and that you shouldn't be prioritizing using side control all that much as you are at least currently, then you can start to avoid months and years of wasted progress thinking that it's a better position. Which is exactly why I put in this next point. 99% of people rock up to jiu-jitsu and have no plan, no structure, and no focus for their training. I used to be one of these guys, so I know exactly what this is like. I used to rock up to training with a bunch of my mates. I had the weirdest training room ever when I first started. Most training rooms are full of skinny, tiny little blue belts that are 65 kilos or 75 kilos, and they're 5'8", and they use berimbolos and lasso and spider guard and whatever else. My training room when I first started was very different. We were all above 85 kilos. We were all previous athletes, ex-military, and we all just wanted to kill each other every session, which was a ton of fun. But I didn't make nearly as much progress in that first 7 months than I did in the 7 months past that, when my coach was looking at my game and giving me a direct purpose for each session to make sure that I could plug the holes that he was seeing that I was unaware of because I wasn't rolling with any sort of purpose. He told me when I first got to the gym, he goes, look, you're a big guy, you're very athletic, and you're probably going to win a lot of matches just with that. But if you do not spend the next 6 months working out a game from bottom, playing off of your back and becoming dangerous in all areas, then you're going to have a massive problem later on. So the purpose for my sessions then began, if I wanted to play top position, I would have to earn the right by sweeping from bottom. Now this took forever to develop, where I wasn't going back to point number 3 and relying on a shit ton of strength to force things to happen. So you can see that these points actually work in conjunction with each other to help you generate progress reliably, because you're not making the same mistakes that cost you progress moving forwards. After I'd done those initial 6 months off my back, I started to move into the next phase of what my priority would be for the session and what my goal would be for the session. And it was tightening things up like butterfly guard, X guard, learning how to use orimiashi. Just like I teach my students, link down below, I would come to the session with a plan, and then I would know whether or not I'd moved forwards based on whether I executed the plan or not. And this made so much sense because I do it in every other area of my life. It's just not commonly taught in jiu-jitsu, which is kind of fucking stupid. So if you want to make considerable progress and stop wasting years of time on the mat, come to your session with a plan, roll with a purpose. Which leads me to the next biggest issue that most people face in learning the sport. Everybody wants to memorize moves, but nobody wants to put the time in to understand the moves. Everybody knows the steps to memorize to hit a successful knee cut. But if you don't know why you're doing those processes, then it's going to be very difficult to execute that under the pressure and the exhaustion of a match, for instance. We all know a know-it-all blue belt who's an encyclopedia of knowledge. But when you roll with him, his game falls apart straight away. That doesn't make any sense, right? But it does, because all he's focused on is the rote learning memorization part of the sport. He doesn't actually understand the deeper meaning as to why those moves work in the first place. For example, if you just memorize that X guard is a good sweeping position, then you likely are missing the points of understanding why that is. The reason why X guard is such a good sweeping position is because you have control of both of their legs. You have an ability to be able to spread their legs as far as possible. Don't take that as an innuendo. Spread their legs as far as possible and compromise their base. So you can see how if you develop a deeper understanding rather than just the memorization of the moves, you'll actually have 10 times more success in their effectiveness and you'll plow through plateaus much faster. Which leads me into my last point and arguably the biggest prevention of progress in all of jiu-jitsu. Gary Tonin is very famous for saying that he is completely comfortable getting tapped up to 15 times a session. Now, why is that? If you've ever met Gary Tonin, it's because Gary doesn't give a fuck. But more than that, the layer behind that is that he understands that tapping in training doesn't mean anything. It's just data collection. It's just experience. Whereas you guys and me, when I first started, absolutely hated the thought of even raising my hand or your hand, so much so that you probably took some pops that you didn't need to, because the guy that was applying the armbar had started after you and there's this big story behind it. You want to make sure that you're ahead of him and so on and so forth. That is one of the biggest reasons that your progress comes to a steaming halt, because when you're terrified of getting submitted because you think it means something in training, you start to ball up, you start to hesitate, you start to focus on ways to completely avoid them contacting you and therefore you being effective as well. Because if both of you aren't contacting each other, jiu-jitsu doesn't exist. It's like when white belts first start a match and they're like kind of shadow boxing around each other and dancing around and not making any contact. That is completely fucking ineffective and it will get you absolutely nowhere. And so if you're just avoiding contact to avoid getting submitted, you think it makes you shit at the sport, then you're going to have years of very slow progress and massive gaps where you develop no skills. So if you can avoid these 7 mistakes, I guarantee your training not only becomes more enjoyable, you build more confidence, you build more composure, but you get the results that you're after in a much faster period of time. And if you want to get even faster results than just avoiding these mistakes, and you want to recall every detail so that you can actually feel like you're gaining an understanding of the moves that you're learning, click this video here and I'll take you through it step by step. See you on the other side.